Nice long countdown, so we don't like just
Nice.
get shocked and surprised here. But dude, I'm so pumped to do this. I'm so amped to have you on. One,
Yeah, man.
selfishly because we just haven't had an opportunity to catch up in a while, and two, um, I think this is like a part of like your background and your training experience and just your life that we've never really talked a ton about. And so I'm super intrigued to dive into it. And so for people listening, the general vibe of the episode today, we're going to talk about running ultras and I think exploring in the mountains. 'Cause I think those two things are very tightly synced together for a lot of folks. And so I have my really good buddy here, Bryce Astill, to come on board because I think you're one of the only people I know who's actually run multiple ultras and been involved in this community. And, you know, I can remember when these things started to come up a couple of years ago, like it was something that you just heard. It was a whisper off in the distance. Someone's like, "Oh yeah, this dude ran an ultra," and you're kind of like, "Okay, whatever." But like, what's that? And you're just kind of off with your day. Now I can't seem to look anywhere without seeing people talking about running ultras, whether it's 100 milers, 200 milers, and it's you can see this wave coming of more and more people getting into this very. It is an extreme sport, so we can go ahead and call it that. But before we kind of dive into all of that goodness, maybe you can just give people a quick elevator pitch background just on you, who you are, and I think your experience in this realm because you've been around it for a little while.
Cool. Yeah, awesome to be on here with you too, man. Thanks for the invite, and I always love talking about this stuff because they're, I would say, exploring in the mountains and ultra running are two of my probably deepest passions.
Mm-hmm.
And they definitely go hand in hand. Um, my background with ultras, it is interesting how much the sport's grown. I was fortunate to get into it just before that huge spike, where it was much more fringe than it is now, and it's still pretty fringe. But it's certainly, I think with the rise of with social media and all these things, it's definitely like kind of blasted it, and people are just realizing like, oh, these aren't impossible things to do. So,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I got into it kind of by way of, you know, a friend of mine who owned a CrossFit gym. He was more of an endurance guy. His business partner was like the strength dude, and so I would train with him a bunch. He was into doing triathlons and such, and so um, I had run a marathon and was getting back into. I was really kind of getting into. Um, I got into marathons, or I did a marathon like a couple years post coming out of like drug rehab, and um, and just really like loved the endurance piece and the focus of it, and um, it got me fit, and then got into strength and conditioning to like, because I had like a couple little twingy injuries in my knee from that, and learned how to run and how to strength train so that that never happened again. And then, but yeah, that like, so I got into these Ironmans, and then I had a friend of mine, her stepdad was doing a race called the Wasatch 100, which is definitely one of the more difficult 100 milers in the nation, and one of the oldest as well. And there's 27,000 feet of vertical and the same drop. So
Gross.
it's yeah, it's gnarly. You're always going up or down. There's very like few, you know, flat runnable spots in that race. Like it's legit. And but anyways, he was running that. We were at a birthday brunch for her, and he kind of roped me into it. He's like, "Oh, I heard you really like to run." He's like, "I'm doing this 100-mile race. Do you want to run 40 miles of it with me?" And I was like, "Dude, the longest I've done is 26. Like, I don't even know if I can run 40 miles, you know?"
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, "No, no, you'll be fine. I'll have run this far, and so I'm not going to be going very fast. And like, we can train together as I'm training for it. And like, I would love to have you run with me." And he's like, you can have a pacer. Most races will give you, in the 100-mile distance, will allow you a pacer after 40 or 50 miles. And so he was going to have me run 40 and a buddy of his from England run the other 20. And so I told him I would do it and without any promise of being able to go that far. And then his buddy from England bailed on him like fairly last moment. And so he was like, "Well, do you want to just run the whole 60 with me?" And I gave him the same promise. I said, "I don't know if I can, but I'll try." And
Yeah.
but it was pretty amazing because I was training for a full Ironman that year, and while trying to work 3 different jobs, and most of my training for that Ironman just ended up being running in the mountains because as soon as I started running on trails with him, I just couldn't get myself to even run on the road anymore, and I just loved it. You know, I've backpacked and done a lot of hiking in my life since I was young, and sort of combine, you know, trail running, um, uh, or, you know, starting to run on trails and having these races in order to train for them and stuff just became, I just fell in love with it because it was just so much fun to run 50 to 70 miles a week in the mountains. And,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, so I ended up running that 60 miles with him, which was like quite the adventure. And, you know, and it was just enough, you know, for my foolish brain to say, well, if you can do 60, you can do 100, which later I
Yeah.
realized I was like, you know, 40 miles is a hell of a lot more than 60 or 40 more miles, you know, is quite a bit on top of that 60. And, but so I signed up for the race the next year, and, it was a lottery at the time, and because there's enough people that want to do it, and there's a pretty limited number of spots because of Forest Service permits. And I got in that
Mm-hmm.
first year, so I was like, oh shit, here we go. And
It's happening.
that started a decade love with ultra running, and yeah, that was back in 2010 or 2011. I think it was 2011 that I did that first 100 miler. So so yeah, just 11 years ago, and so that, I don't know, I've done 600-mile races, I think, and 4 200+ mile distance races, and a handful of 50Ks and 50 milers, and then a lot of just self-supported fun long runs like that, and that's really, you know, yeah, so that's the main background there is yeah, once I started, I haven't been able to stop, although the last couple of years I've taken a nice rest.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I think you earned a little time down from the mileage.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I think a really interesting question with regards to this type of event, because people hear this, right? People hear 100 miles and they like fall out of their chair, right? Because we're sitting around thinking about. I actually saw a little meme of this the other day. I thought was hysterical. It was like a bracket, you know, like a Sweet 16 bracket, but the bracket was things you hated most about school, and one of like the top 10 seeds was running the mile because and so I think that's what a lot of people still got to think of in their minds, right? Like, obviously, we have people that love endurance and they automatically are drawn to this. But I would imagine the vast majority of the population hears about people going out and running a 100-mile race and they're just flabbergasted by this. And I know I definitely was when I first started hearing like the distances involved. But what I would love to know is for you, was it was the draw largely the challenge of it? Was it being able to say like, yeah, I can do this, right? Because like when I think about it, it's so different than like running a 5K, right? Because a 5K in my mind is like such a performance heavy event. A
Hmm.
5K, a 10K, or a mile even. Sorry, like 5K, 10K, or like a marathon. Those are like so performance heavy. When you start getting out to that 100, 150, 200-mile distances, there is still obviously a performance component to it. You're trying to do it as fast as you can.
Hmm.
But for me, it seems like this, it's the monumental nature of the challenge. And it's more about being able to prove to yourself that you can actually set out to do this thing and then accomplish it and do it. Is that like a pretty fair assessment of kind of like what got you into it after you had the small air quotes, small 60-mile exposure with your buddy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, curiosity was one of the strong drivers of it. And particularly with the timing of my life, like, 2 years prior to running that marathon, I, had had a decade of pretty heavy alcohol use and coke and heroin use, and lived a very different lifestyle. And in that first couple of years in recovery, I was really just trying to get an emotional hold on my life, which took a good amount of time. And then in that time, I was trying to be more active, but I was inconsistent, and I had gained a decent amount of weight. I was like 50 pounds overweight, and I had run a bit. My dad ran, marathons while I was growing up, and I trained for one in high school, and then didn't run it, and out of spite, because I got in a fight with my dad, which was really funny, because it was a perfect example of like passive aggressive behavior. Is in the moment you think it's like, oh, I'll sure show them, and really it's I sure showed me.
Mm-hmm.
And and so because I put in all the training, I was ready to run this race. We got in a fight, and then I like chose not to run it because, like, it was like, screw you, I'm not doing this thing, which really, like, it left a curiosity in my mind, like, would I have been able to do it?
Mm-hmm.
And so, it was helpful for me to have a goal to work towards. And so I signed up for that same marathon. And it got me consistent, and it was, similar to any distance and any challenge. It's like, can I? There's the conceptual in your head that I think I can do this thing, and then there's the actual experience of it. And so that, I remember finishing that first race, that first marathon, and the longest I had run was, I think, 20 miles or something like that. So you have 6.2 more miles than that. And so when you cross that threshold of like the unknown, like, can I do it? There's just a really empowering feeling that comes with that. I remember I was a mile away from finishing that race, and it was really funny. Like, we're turning this corner that's a mile in to the St. George Marathon, and like, you're in town at this point, and this cop that was blocking traffic was like, you guys are almost there, 1 mile to go. And it hit my brain, and I was like, holy shit, I'm going to finish this thing. This unknown distance, this unknown challenge. And I knew I was going to finish it. And I'm running next to this guy, and we're running at a pretty good clip. And I just start bawling.
Mm-hmm.
I just have this like overwhelming feeling of gratitude and joy and accomplishment, and which was really funny, because he had no idea what was going on inside my head. He just gave me a strange look, like, dude, if it hurts that bad, like, just slow down or something. Like, what's going on? But it was like really just pure happiness, like, pure joy, and that carried me into the finish line. So then that just kind of got me hooked on like it's like, like, what is a limit, like, what is our human limit? What's our, and not just physically, but really, the longer you go, the more mental it becomes, the more, in some sense of the word, it's almost like a spiritual, mental, type of a challenge, where you're really digging deep to see, like, where will you quit and where will you keep going? Like, how hard does the adversity have to get? How difficult mentally can it get? And can you still push over that edge, or push beyond that edge in some sense? So, and so ultra races just became this, this next level thing. And it's like I said, like, the 60 miles was, I remember hearing when he told me he was running a 100-mile race, I was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Exactly.
Just period. It was, I told him that. I said, that sounds absolutely stupid. And it did. And so, but then, watching him complete that, and watching him go through the roughest moments, because And there's some rough moments. I mean, I remember there was a number of miles where he was just barely shuffling along and stopping every like 5 minutes to fix his feet. He had blisters and all this stuff, and you're trying to be like the sweet, supportive friend, and you're kind of being the asshole. And then, you're trying all these different methods of like inspiration. And
Yep.
what worked was me finally getting like, a little bit like tough love with him, and it was just like, you're not stopping anymore. You have to move faster so you can finish this damn thing. You just got to go. And it took him like
Mm-hmm.
10 or 15 minutes for that to kick in. And then all of a sudden he just started going, and he was in this like weird dark phase, that he couldn't really comprehend or understand what was going on. And then that, something snapped him out of it and he kept going. So it was like, it's fun to see in those events too, if you're even just supporting people that are doing it, to watch that psychology happen in real time and to see, you know, it becomes really important. Like, why are you doing it? What's the point? And each person has their own individual why it's important to them. And you can often see when people don't have a very, if it's completely ego based, oftentimes it doesn't work so well. There's got to be,
Mm-hmm.
at least in my experience and with what I've seen of other people and stuff, if it's primarily ego based, like, those people oftentimes don't make it or don't finish it. If it's just like, oh, I want to be able to say I did it.
Yeah.
But there's definitely some ego in there. It feels cool to be able to say it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I think I love the way you described it, because I think there's something just so inherently beautiful about asking that all powerful question of like, can I do this? What is my limit? And then actually setting a goal and an objective for yourself and working hard towards that goal and objective, and then seeing it through to the end and proving to yourself that, like, I can do it. I can push past these limits that I thought were in place. I just think that's like one of the most beautiful parts of the human experience, like, overall. And you see it in many different endeavors, right? It doesn't have to be in ultras. I think ultras are a really great example of it, because it is such a unique challenge. And as you mentioned, I think that at a certain point into that race, again, kind of the distinction between that 5K, 10K marathon, where that's a very performance heavy events, that ultra really drifts so heavily into the mental space, because like you can keep going. Like, you can almost always keep going. Like, you can just keep shuffling and putting one foot in front of the other, right? And at some point, you're going to run into that wall and hit that really dark space, like your friend did, as you mentioned. And your capacity to come out of that and to conquer that moment is just so huge. And I think those wins are things that you end up carrying with you forever after that moment, because they are such a powerful reflection on the human experience.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. And I mean, that again becomes, at least for me, is and was, one of the bigger draws to that. And I feel like I was primed well for it, getting off of heroin, because it's something a lot of people don't do, and it's terribly difficult, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But that also gave me that curiosity. It's like, oh, and that's why I bring in like the human spirit, whatever the hell that means to each person, because it really, in some ways, you end up relying on something that's beyond the body and beyond the mind, and that's really, really deep within us. That to me can only really be described as the human spirit, and
Yeah.
and it's a really amazing to be able to tap into that. That experience alone is very intimate and personal. And the other thing is like, okay, well, if we have this indomitable, human spirit and limitless human spirit, what does that really feel like and mean? And how do
Mm-hmm.
we access it, and how do we keep pushing it? And it's like you said, it doesn't really matter the endeavor, whether it's in lifting weights, whether it's in running, whether it's in, other 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 areas where you're pushing beyond an edge and a limit.
No, I 100% agree there. So I think the next place I would like to take this are two broad categories.
Hmm.
The first is with regards to the unique challenges of actually running and completing one of these. Like once we're actually there and into the race, because it is so different than pretty much everything else out there because the time domain involved, right? Like for 100 miler, you're looking at like 20, like under 24 hours is kind of the goal, right? Like that's kind of the threshold that you're shooting for, more or less. I could be wrong there. I think those are like the numbers that I've seen floating around. Maybe it's more like 20 hours.
Yeah, depends on the race. I mean, a race like the Wasatch 100 with that much elevation gain and loss is, it's a really stout and an incredible time
Mm-hmm.
to be under 24 hours. The cutoff for that race is 36 hours. And so each race is a little bit different. Races that are more in the domain of like 15 to 20,000 feet of vertical will typically have like a 30 to 32 hour cutoff, and the winning times will be, in the 17 to 20 hour range or something like that
Mm-hmm.
for the real elite, like the elite of elites. Um, but yeah, so I mean, and really any 100 miler, if you can do it in under 24 hours, is a pretty stellar time.
And so that's where the unique challenge of this really comes in, because now we're starting to think about sleep maintenance, um, calorie manipulation, making sure you're getting in enough food, making sure you're getting in enough water and hydration. Those are things, and like temperature regulation as well, because you're probably going to run at night, and it's probably going to be pretty cold because in the mountains when the sun goes down, it gets a little frigid. So those are like three really big things that leap off the page at me in terms of the actual execution of the event, in terms of like where are things going to get really hard outside of just the physical demand of doing it. What are the extra
Mm-hmm.
things, right? Like you're gonna have to do it and not really sleep. You're gonna have to figure out how to make sure you're getting in food and some type of sustenance along the way, and then you're gonna have to figure out managing these large temperature swings. What are some strategies or tactics or ways that you approach those when you've been running the ultras? Because like the sleep one for me, I think would be the hardest, because you can't lay down and go to sleep for like 5 hours. It's like you shut like don't like you kind of just like grab 15 minutes here and 15 minutes there if you can, or you just don't do it at all. With your experience, like what does that actually look like?
Gotcha. Yeah, and like, yeah, I mean, those are typically the things that destroy races for people, or get them to drop. Is the number one thing is nutrition. Figuring out how to, because it's like, um, yeah, once you're beyond so many hours, it's like if you're not continuing to fuel, you will run out. And so uh, being able to eat while you're moving, even if you're stopping to eat, becomes a really difficult thing for most people. And there's a whole array of options. There's, if you feel like you can do it fast enough and your stomach can handle it, you can do like just these 100 calorie gels, and you do you know, a couple per hour. So you're getting like 200 to 300 calories per
Mm-hmm.
hour is kind of the general formula that seems to work well for most people. But gels are also nearly pure sugar. So at some point, 20 hours in, I've literally pulled out gels at like mile 85, and the sight of it made me throw up. And then I just, I literally pulled one out, threw up, opened it, ate it, and was like, no, it actually went down better now that I like puked. And, so there's these, you're dealing with gastrointestinal stuff throughout the thing. And then, it's like for a while, solid food might work or fruit might work. And really that's the heart. I think that's probably, in my experience and really just watching others in this field, like it's the thing that is one of the most, other than just putting in the time to train. It's really the next thing that if you can figure it out, gives you a big advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and people have tried all sorts of crazy shit, as far as like, I mean, I one guy that who he's always a hell of a runner. I've raced with him a handful of times. Like he had to drop from several races from, because of gels and this and that. And so he figured out that drinking, you know, those core power protein drinks the entire race, like
Mm-hmm.
worked for him, and then there's people, there's more people there's a handful of people that are doing more of a fat burning style, keto-ish with, kind of a deal and relying more on those
Mm-hmm.
fat stores, and that works for some people and not for others. And then there's, ideally if you can make the gels work, it's like the easiest thing because they're just
They're
quick,
so light.
they're easy, they're light.
Because that's the thing I'm thinking. I'm trying to think, what do I want to carry with me
Yeah,
when I'm
yeah,
running 100 miles? Because the extra weight
yeah,
matters like
yeah.
significantly.
And the joy of those long races, and it's, is that there's aid stations every like 7 to 10-ish miles, and so you don't have to carry much with you.
You can have like a
And
team that meets you at those stations and like
yeah, you like
hand you things.
typically if you have a crew that, they can get your stuff ready. I mean, people have dialed it in to a science with specific races and stuff. And then,
Mm-hmm.
the races typically provide a handful of those very quick carb type foods at the aid stations and stuff. So you can, I mean, my thing was always like run into an aid station, throw away my old gels, fill up my water, grab the new gels I need, and then like typically in one hand, I would leave the aid station as fast as I could with like a handful of potato chips and a handful of like whatever else sounded good at the time, which could have been watermelon, it could have been brownies, it could have been, whatever it was. And
Ribeye.
yeah, yeah.
It's like
Well,
running down the
so
trail.
then, yeah. So you get into the longer distances, the 200 milers, and you're moving slower. So those, like the sugary foods, didn't work very well. And I was eating really just 3 meals a day, and I would eat
Mm-hmm.
quesadillas and burgers and pancakes and whatever the hell else they had. They'd make like real food at
Yeah,
those aid stations, and
that's
like
great.
they'd have like to order cooks going, making some of the best burgers you've ever had, or or
I feel like
yeah,
I feel like the aid station, while necessary and 100% needs to be there, the aid station is also an enormous trap. It's that moment of comfort, right? Because like you're suffering and this thing sucks, but hey, I get to this aid station and they're gonna put me in the blanket and I'm gonna sit down in a chair and these people are gonna bring me food. Like it's necessary, but the psychological test of the aid station is so real because it'd be so easy to just sit there and then be like, fuck this, I'm not getting up. Like I am done.
and you have no idea because typically these aid stations have an aid station captain and a crew of people that have been like volunteering at these particular like beautiful, cool mountain locations for years, and
Mm-hmm.
they dial it in and they want to be like the best aid station. And so some of them I mean, they'll have lights, they'll have music, they'll have comfortable chairs, and they'll be cooking good food, and you can very easily spend a lot of time at those aid stations. um,
Yeah.
the first 100 miler I did, I ended up, I totaled up my aid station like sitting, and it ended up being like, I don't know, a couple hours total, over the 100 miles. And so I made a promise to myself. I was like, in and out, just what you need
Mm-hmm.
to do. And so I wouldn't, unless I needed to sit down to like change a pair of shoes or socks or something like that, there was no sitting. And
Yeah.
it was like, get in there and get the hell out as quick as you can because they are seductive. And certain
Mm-hmm.
aid stations, they've done a great job of making them more seductive. And some people that do the races and they have no intentions of doing them fast, they're just there to do it and have a good time and be
Completion.
supported. Like they love those aid stations.
Yeah. It's like a
um,
little party every so
yeah.
many miles.
The good thing is there's typically other ultra runners that are volunteering at these aid stations, and so those people are usually the ones that are like kicking people's ass to get out of there,
Mm-hmm.
and really trying to
Yeah.
support people to like push them along, and
You need
stuff. And
that.
so, but yeah, there's aid stations, man, that you're just like, fuck, it would feel so when you're really hurting and nothing's no food's going down well and like that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's there's nothing like a good chair and a fire. If it's cold as hell, like I've done some where it's just absolutely freezing, and you'll go inside of an aid station tent and they've got, heaters and it's very, one of the 200-mile races I did, I think it was 8 degrees outside in the LaSalle Mountains, and there was a really nasty like north headwind coming the direction you were running, and which made
It's
it
in the
almost
face.
-10 with the wind chill or something
Yeah.
like that. And nobody had like I came in there, I took a 15-minute nap, and I knew I was like, I got to get the hell out of here because the aid station captain was like, nobody's left here in 2.5 hours.
Mm.
And so when I got up to leave, he's like, "Oh, all right, you're the first person to leave in the last 2.5 hours. Good job."
Yeah. Oh my God.
I was like, "Yeah, I can't stay
How do
here."
you
Like,
how do you like to try to manage the sleep bit? Like on a 100-miler, is it just I'm just not going to sleep. Like it's just 20 something hours. I'll sleep later. And then I guess as we start getting into the 200 plus milers, sleep becomes a major part of the strategy. It has to.
yeah, so the 100-mile distances, I ended up the very first one I did, the Wasatch 100. I sprained my ankle like 20 miles in, and I
Nice.
was running in Vibram Five Fingers, and so it got pretty rough and slow um, once the ibuprofen stopped really doing anything, and uh, and so that one I ended up like it took me 32 hours or something like that to finish that one, and so I went through some like harsh sleep deprivation at kind of the morning dawn hours
Mm-hmm.
after running and kind of moving all night, and and it was rough. It was like head bobbing on the trail, and I was trying to lay down and take a nap, but my pacer wouldn't let me. He's like, no, you have to keep moving. So that was just brutal. Um, the other ones I did, I was fortunate enough to do them fast enough where I never hit that point.
Mm-hmm.
I was always kind of under the 24-hour mark, and so which I was like, oh man, that's so much easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it really just depends on your speed in the 100-mile races. Can if you can avoid going beyond that like 26 to 27 hour mark, you can probably get through without any like sleep deprivation trouble, or too harsh of a desire to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, the 200 milers, that's you're running for anywhere between 70 and 100 hours, and so um, it's three plus days, and so it's you're going to deal with sleep deprivation no matter what. And some people, it's really everybody does it differently. Like those races will have aid stations that have sleep aid stations, which I found were terribly difficult to sleep in because you got people coming in and
Mm-hmm.
out. One of them, they for some reason they were ringing a fucking cowbell every time a runner came in. So it was just and then yeah, like and like so that was going on, and then like another runner came in with his wife and their baby who was crying. And he was like taking his shoes off and like, oh, because his feet
Yeah.
hurt. Like, so I realized with those, for me, um, scheduled sleep was not effective. I would just run until I like started doing like the head bob, like when you drive too
Mm-hmm.
tired, to where you're like literally almost falling asleep while running, and kind of my run would become this unproductive kind of drunk stumble, and and so when I'd get to that point, I'd just throw a jacket on, and I would, go 20 feet off trail and just curl up in the fetal position on the softest ground I could find. And I would set an alarm for 15 minutes, and I would pass the fuck out
Mm-hmm.
completely. And I would always wake up at like 12 minutes for whatever reason. And I would feel fresh, and that would be like good enough. And I'd get up and I could run again, and felt pretty good. And each of those races that I did, some of them I got away with just, maybe 3 to 5 of those, and other races it took me 7 or 8 of those. So, but then there's people who they schedule their sleep. They'll like, they'll sleep like a full 3 hours or something like that, and then that works better for them. So, a lot of it is really discovery of, figuring out what works
Mm-hmm.
for you, and And then there's like the freak elite people, like Courtney Dauwalter, who,
Yeah.
set the original record on the Moab 240 by beating all of the men by over 10 hours, and
Yeah, she
literally,
could have slept a full 8 hours and and still had a
yeah,
couple hours to
yeah, and
spare.
she slept 60 seconds. She laid down and took a 1 minute nap, and
Oh my
that was
God.
like, she
She's a
she was mad.
savage.
She was mad when she woke up at her husband because she thought he let her sleep for like, 20 minutes or an hour, and it was literally a minute.
Hmm.
So, so some people can do it like that, and but yeah, I mean, it's everyone's a little bit different. For me, the 10 to 15 minute, dirt nap, um, when necessary, seemed to work really well, so
Excellent.
yeah.
So last question here in this realm. Um, what does preparation like? This would be an entire podcast by itself. Obviously, talking like preparation for these things. So I'm going to try and narrow in on this for us because we're kind of coming up towards the end of time. And I guess my real question is, in preparation for this, what kind of distances do you work up to, right? Because like you're not going to go run a 100 miler. Like you can't replicate that in training fully. So are you cumulatively just doing a lot of 20, 30, maybe 40 mile, like runs on a build up to your actual game day? Because that's the hard part there, right? Because more in like my world, in like the strength and conditioning world, like we can get pretty darn close in training from a specificity standpoint to like exactly what you're gonna do on game day. You're probably not going to get to a point to where like we're going to peak you. Hey, like, go run 100 miles this week, and then we're going to deload so you can run 100 miles again next week. Um, it seems like a very different game. So I was curious what kind of distances you do build up to, like on the tail end of a training program leading into one of these.
Yeah, it's a great question, and again, there's some variety in theories and practices of how to do it, but um, it's definitely one of those things where, yeah, like if you're running 100 miles to run 100 miles, like you're going to burn your body out very quickly that way, because the
Mm-hmm.
breakdown from those longer distances, just it's too much. You need more space in between, um, particularly when you're starting. And just like a marathon, you might get up to 18 to 20 miles total before you do 26, but you don't really need to
Mm-hmm.
run the 26. And the longer the distance, like, yeah, it's really not much further. The first year I was training, I did like a handful of like 30 to 40 mile runs on the weekends. And even those seem to be like just long enough to cause kind of a negative, uh, um, yeah, they were hard to recover from. And so I figured out, um, pretty quickly after that first year training, I found somebody sent me this training plan that was quite a bit different from what I was doing. Rather than doing these big, long, these 30 plus 40 mile, 50-mile runs and that kind of thing. Um, you were doing 50 to 70 miles a week. Um, but I never ran more than like 25 miles at a time.
Mm-hmm.
But what would happen is I would run, Friday, Saturday, Sunday would be like 15, 20, 25. So you're getting the bulk of the mileage for your week in 3 consecutive days or 2 consecutive days. And, but you're getting a recovery in between. You're getting food, you're getting
Mm-hmm.
rest, you're getting sleep. And so it's pretty amazing. And the longer you kind of go into it, and as you build your base for it, I think you can get away with some of those longer ones without negative effect. Um, as I was getting into the 200-mile races, I did some fun runs that were kind of self-designed, uh, that ended up being in the 40 to 60-mile distance or something like that. But um, uh, for the most part, I'd still, if I was going to train for another 200 miler today, I don't think I would run more than 25 to 30 miles at a time. But I would add in, you know, I would do, back to back or back to back to back long distances so that your body knows how to run a a little bit beat up, you get time on your feet, time on the joints, and you really build that part of your resilience in your body up through that. But it's pretty amazing. It's like, you know, your longest run at one time might be 25 or 30 miles, and then you can do 100.
Yep. It's incredible.
So
it is incredible.
Yeah. And so a lot of that comes from figuring out your food, your sleep, your rest, your recovery, all those little things that we oftentimes don't think about, but are, you know, just like if you're strength and conditioning, like if you're doing strength and conditioning and really pushing towards an edge there,
Mm-hmm.
the closer you get to your own personal edges, the more important all those little things become.
Yeah.
You know, dialing all of that stuff in. And so, but yeah, I mean, most of the training that I would do for a race, like the biggest weeks I would get to is maybe 70 miles, you know, and more averaged out at like 50 miles a week.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
You can do a lot with a little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, this has been amazing. I'm so glad we got to do this. Yeah. This has been fantastic. This is honestly like one of my favorite podcasts that we've recorded. We're like on over 100 by now. But like this is something that I really don't know much about, but have been super curious about for a while. And I think it taps into a lot of psychological things for me that I just really dig and enjoy. That's not to say I'm going to ever run a 100-miler. Who knows? Maybe one day. And you'll be my first person to call for pacing. But dude, this was so wonderful. Thanks so much, man. I'm so glad we got to do this.
Well, it's super fun. And like I said, I love talking about this stuff, and never count yourself out. It's, there's a guy that I ran into at a few races. He's a German guy. I think his name was Hans Dieter, but I don't think he started running till he was like 60. And when I met him, he was 70 or 71, and he had the most 100-mile finishes of anybody at like 170 of them. And he would just walk them all. He would just hike them all. And sometimes he would make the cutoff, sometimes he wouldn't. And you know, he had none of the fancy stuff. He would do them in like a fishing vest with some like plastic water bottles in it. And he was real charming. So sometimes he would pick up like cute girls at aid stations to pace him through the next section. And
dude's just enjoying life. I love it.
Yeah. So again, man, there's, you know, you can start at whatever age, and yeah. So it's the 100-mile or these bigger distances, it is hard to comprehend in the mind, but it's like anything, it's all relative, and it just starts, you know, I mean, when I started running, I was 50 pounds overweight, and literally running a mile destroyed me. Mm-hmm. But consistency, it's the same principles of any sort of endeavor. You know, consistency, you know, getting help through good coaching, and to find out what you don't know, you know, is a huge one. And then just, you know, if you have a genuine curiosity to see if you can, you know, like that's the big drive to me, is like, you know, are you interested in seeing if you could? And if you are, you probably can. Mm-hmm. So
I love it, dude.
I don't know, it's cool.
I love it.
And it's like you said, like all these different sports and endeavors that we do, the basic principles are all pretty similar. Mm-hmm. And then it's just figuring out and you know, the little details, and you find those out by just doing it.
For sure. So I'll ask this question, and you feel free to say no to this, but I always ask this at the very end, and I always phrase it very specifically.
Perfect.
If you would like to be found, if someone's listening to this and they're like, Bryce, dude, this has been super inspiring, I would love to just like learn more about this, to chat you up or like something. If you would like to be found, mm-hmm. if the answer to that is no, that's totally okay. But if you would like to be found, where's the best place where people go to like ping you or to reach out or follow you?
Yeah. So I mean, you can find me on Instagram. I don't really get on Facebook, but I still have one. And yeah, I get on Instagram more than I'd like to. And it's just Bryce Astill. It's my handle. Yeah, I mean, if you have questions about ultra running or the mental part of it, I'm a meditation mindfulness teacher in Salt Lake, and you know, those are running in the mountains and meditation, mindfulness, like psychology, that kind of stuff are really, two of my biggest passions. And so I can talk about that stuff for way longer than most people want to. And I'm always happy to help. I was helped by so many people, getting into these different things. And, I don't think, I think it's very easy to think that, oh, that person has more mental toughness than me, or that person, has a better build for running. And sometimes that's true, but like, in general, it's really a matter of like starting where you are and having the desire to do so, and then finding the right people and the right help to like move you towards that direction and that goal. So, if ultra running or building mental resilience and those kinds of things are important to you, or where you'd like some pointers or tips, or have conversations about those, I'm happy to have those with people. So yeah, you can find me on those, or that's probably the easiest way.
All right, dope. We'll throw those in the show notes for people as well, so it's easy to find. But thank you for tuning in for this week, everybody. Hope you all have a beautiful rest of your week, and yeah, we'll be back as always next Monday. All right, folks, have a good one.